Hello everyone, I am the Bandit Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on our commander from the Innistrad Crimson Vow Precons, Millicent Restless Revenant. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is by Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Millicent is a 4/4 Spirit Soldier with flying for 5 generic, 1 white, and 1 blue. While this might seem like a hefty casting cost, she actually has a built-in cost-reducing ability, which also takes the commander tax into consideration. She costs 1 generic less for each spirit you control, which, while already being enough indication that she's a Spirit Lord, isn't her only tribal ability. Whether she or another non-token spirit you control deals combat damage to a player, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. This is such an amazing ability and is quite refreshing for white-blue in terms of commander, since she's not a control commander. She's an aggro commander, which is a nice change of pace for white-blue. Being able to amass a huge army of flyers is no joke, especially when you can buff them up with the other lords. Speaking of, as a tribe, spirits have gotten a recent push and emphasis, so a spirit tribal deck is very viable, especially when it comes to lords and other tribal effects. Drogskull Captain, Gallows Warden, Patrician Geist, and Supreme Phantom are pretty straightforward when it comes to lords. Each of these giving some pump, but the Captain is the best one since it also gives hexproof, making it easier to run less protective effects in the deck since we don't have to worry about targeted effects. Rattle Chains provides another boom in the form of giving flash to our spirit spells. Not only that, but it has flash itself and can give hexproof to one of our spirits when it enters the battlefield, all for just 2 mana no less. If that weren't enough, it's a 2/1 flyer to boot. All of this is just icing on the cake since its main function is to provide flash to our spirit spells. Speaking of our spirit spells, Baku Walter, Cloudhoof Kirin, Oyobi Who Split the Heavens, and Sire of the Storm all trigger whenever we cast a spirit spell. Each of these have different abilities, but all of them useful, whether we're creating more spirits, disrupting opponents, or drawing cards. These are definitely worth including in any deck as heavy with spirits such as this one, where 36 of the 38 creature spells are all spirits, but all 38 creatures are essentially spirits, which we'll soon see. Reflections of the Jar also cares about us casting spirits, but we'd have to name that as a creature type as it enters the battlefield. This is such a busted enchantment for any tribal deck, but with this one being an aggro deck that can also use its spirits as responses, it pays to have twice as many of them. Even with doubling down on lords, it's already doing a ton of work. Drogskull Cavalry and Spirit Bonds can also create spirit tokens, furthering the aggro strategy as well as helping Millicent cost as close to just 2 mana as possible. The Spirit Knight helps us gain life, which is a good buffer against other aggro decks since we could just attack with Total Abandon if we're gaining life as well. The enchantment is amazing since it'll create tokens for free. Unfortunately, we can't use its activated ability since all of the creatures in the deck are spirits. That being said, I have used it politically to great effect. Adaptive Automaton, Metallic Mimic, and Bloodlight Pretender are the rest of the Lord effects in the deck, with the first 2 being those non-spirit creatures that I mentioned earlier. While these are the only non-spirit creatures in the deck, they're spirits as they enter the battlefield, so they'll enjoy all of the benefits of being spirits. Heraldic Banner, Obelisk of Erd, Vanquisher's Banner, and Radiant Destiny are similar in that you have to choose spirit as they enter the battlefield, but then pump our spirit creatures without being creatures themselves, which is helpful against creature-based board wipes. Heraldic Banner doubles as a mana rock, which is great, and Vanquisher's Banner draws us cards, which is even better. Coat of Arms is another pump effect, but it works for all creature types, so we don't have to choose. We just have to worry about other players using tribal decks since it'll also pump their armies, and we don't want that, so only use against decks that aren't tribal. Herald's Horn and Urza's Incubator are similar, but are used for reducing the casting costs of our spirit spells. They're amazing here, especially considering that they reduce the cost of 36% of the deck. They're also relatively cheap to cast, so getting them early on is amazing. Kindred Discovery, Ribbons of the Reikai, and Distant Melody also care about choosing a creature type and reward us for that sweet card advantage. Kindred Discovery is especially busted when we have Millicent out. Each time our non-token spirits deal combat damage, we get more spirit tokens with each trigger of the enchantment, drawing us into a ton of cards. It's so good here. Unclaimed Territory, Cavern of Souls, and Path of Ancestry are some lands tied to tribal strategies. While Cavern of Souls is obviously the best land for tribal decks, it's not worth that price tag, and you can easily build this deck without it if you're not going to proxy it or play online. The deck will still run fine without it. Battleground Geist, Empyrean Eagle, and Spirit of the Spires are spirits themselves but not lords for spirit creatures. They're lords for flying creatures. But that's fine since 76% of the creatures in the deck already have flying. Not to mention that all instances of spirits being created are spirit tokens with built-in flying. So these 3 lords do some work. However, Kira Great Glass Spinner, True Conviction, and Cathar's Crusades are possibly the best boons in the deck, though, since they don't care about creature types. Not that it matters anyways, since every creature we're going to have in play is a spirit. In any case, Kira has an amazing ability. It does also care about when we target our own creatures, but that doesn't happen often. If it did, it'd be way less than what an opponent would want to do to them anyways. True Conviction is such an amazing card here. Giving our creatures lifelink means we don't have to worry so much about being defenseless when alpha striking one of our opponents out of the game. However, the double strike is where it's at. With how Millicent's trigger works, we get 2 spirit tokens whenever our non-token creatures successfully deal combat damage to an opponent. That's nothing to scoff at. And if our creatures are huge, then the damage is essentially doubled, having the time it takes to eliminate players and win. Same with Cathar's Crusade, which is such an amazing card here, especially with all the token creation that Millicent gets done. Our creatures become insanely huge. If that weren't enough, Drogskull Reaver, Katilda Dawnhart Martyr, and Sturmgeist are the deck's beaters. These can work on their own to deal some insane damage, especially the last 2, which get even stronger the more time passes. If that weren't enough, if Katilda's in the graveyard, we can disturb her, enchanting Millicent with Katilda's Rising Dawn, and potentially one-shot opponents via commander damage. It's very easy to make Millicent a one-turn clock with just this. Speaking of one-shotting opponents, Strixhaven Stadium also gets the job done. We'll have so many flyers on board that we just need 10 to get through in no particular order, so long as the stadium accumulates the counters. Then it's game over for that opponent. It also doubles as a mana rock, which is great for a non-green deck like this one. As for the rest of the spirits in the deck, these can not only serve to smash face with as they get pumped with all the lord effects in the deck, but are also used as responses to protect our game plan or disrupt opponents. Hanged Executioner, Kami of Ancient Law, Keening Apparition, Mausoleum Wanderer, and Selfless Spirit do just that by sacrificing themselves. The best part of these, excluding the Executioner, is that they can be sacrificed for free at instant speed. You don't even need to tap them. So you can attack with them and then sacrifice them later. And we can even recover them later on with cards like Guiding Spirit and Karmic Guide. Both of these Spirit Angels are amazing at recovering our creatures from the graveyard, but Guiding Spirit is just brutal when combined with the previously mentioned suite of self-sacrificing spirits. Since we're constantly drawing cards, we're not really setting ourselves back by using its ability. Skyclave Apparition, Spectral Adversary, and Spell Queller also disrupt opponents, but only when they enter the battlefield. That being said, being responses on a body, especially one that benefits from all the pumps and tribal effects in the deck, is no joke. These are the best kinds of creatures for this deck since they supply control effects while also being beaters for the aggressive nature of the deck. Guardian of Faith is yet another spirit we can flash in to respond to an opponent's shenanigans. Being able to phase out any number of other creatures in response to a board wipe is such a chef's kiss thing to do. We can even get it back from the graveyard thanks to our recovery effects. Or we can bounce it in response thanks to Spectral Shepherd and Tradewind Wider. These cards are so good here. Not only can we use them to protect any of our creatures by bouncing them, but the Rider can also be used offensively to bounce any permanent an opponent controls, including lands. They're also used to help us reuse effects such as the previously mentioned creatures that haven't entered the battlefield trigger. It's so satisfying to flash in Guardian of Faith in response to a board wipe, only to bounce it in response to its trigger so that all of my creatures are protected from the board wipe, including the Guardian. With all the other effects that care about spirits being cast or entering the battlefield, we can get even more mileage out of these two spirits. They're so good. Same with Deadeye Navigator. While it can't really protect our creatures, particularly the one it's soul bonded to, from board wipes, it can still be used to blink our best creature with an enter the battlefield trigger, which is still amazing. Plus, it's a 5/5 spirit as its base stats, which is nothing to scoff at, especially since it's inevitably going to get pumped even further. Shacklegeist, the final disruptive spirit in the deck, is so good at tapping down potential blockers or attackers. Since we're creating so many spirit tokens, we can weaponize those that has summoning sickness by tapping down opponents' creatures. You'd be surprised just how much work this spirit does, and it's a 2/2 flyer for 2 mana to boot. Spirit of the Hearth and Windborn Muse are some more defensive spirits, but in terms of protecting us. The Cast Spirit gives us hexproof, which is great, but is also a 4/5 flyer, so it's quite the beater. The Muse helps us even further and is going all in our attacks since it has a built-in pillow fort effect. This deck really wants to smash face and does so even while it's simultaneously being annoying with the control and stacks effects. Mirror Hall Mimic is the final spirit in the deck and can be used for absolutely anything since it becomes a copy of any creature on the battlefield as it enters. If that weren't enough, it's still a spirit, meaning that it benefits from all of the lord effects in the deck. This card is so crazy good here. We can copy a lord, a disruptive effect, a defensive effect, a huge beater. The sky is truly the limit, especially since we can copy an opponent's best creature. If that weren't enough, we can disturb it as Ghastly Mimicry and then get a token copy of the enchanted creature at the beginning of our upkeep. That is just so busted here. Imagine getting another lord each upkeep or a self-sacrificer, or just another Drogskull Reaver or Sturmgeist. It's so good. The following cards in the deck are the essential card advantage, responses, and mana acceleration of any deck. Cyclonic Rift is the only non-synergistic response in the deck, but it sort of is, at least here. Overloaded at the end of the turn before ours, and we got rid of any flyers or creatures with reach, and all other non-land permanents for that matter, that can deal with our Alpha Strike. While this inclusion in blue decks is ubiquitous, it ends the game in this deck. Bident of Thassa, Coastal Piracy, and Reconnaissance Mission aren't tied to creature types like the rest of the card advantage pieces of the deck, but these are incredibly synergistic considering the aggressive nature of the deck. We're attacking with a ton of flyers. Getting a big enough chunk of them in means drawing a ton of cards with these enchantments out. They do a ton of work. So much so that Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are included for good measure. The deck is only 2 colors and isn't green, so they don't take up slots in the deck, especially the tower since it doesn't enter tapped and provides mana. Speaking of, Sword of the Animus and Sword of Hearth and Home are included since we're almost always going to have some creature get through. The first sword triggers on attack, so it doesn't even matter to a need to connect. These help us tremendously to accelerate our game via actual land-based ramp, which is difficult to deal with since so many players frown upon mass land destruction and stacks effects. As a bonus, Sword of Hearth and Home also blinks one of our creatures, which is great for doubling enter the battlefield triggers. Mana Crypt, Sol Ring, Arcane Signet, Azuria Signet, and Talisman of Progress being in the deck is pretty self-explanatory and don't really require any further explanation that we need mana rocks for the deck to run, especially since it's not green. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx taps for a lot of mana in this deck considering the amount of colored permanents in it. Even though the deck isn't monocolored, this still taps for plenty of either white or blue mana. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands: Tundra, Hollowed Fountain, Prairie Stream, Irrigated Farmland, Glacial Floodplain, Glacial Fortress, Mystic Gate, Sea of Clouds, Nimbus Maze, Reflecting Pool, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 5 of each basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you don't need to run the more expensive mana acceleration pieces like Tundra, Mana Crypt, Ancient Tomb, etc. if you don't have them, won't proxy them, or aren't playing online. You can very easily swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still run well enough. This brew is just an idea of how to build around a Millicent Restless Revenant. With Spirits as a creature type getting a lot of tribal support in recent years, it was very easy to build a brutal tribal deck where all of the creatures are spirits. That wouldn't have been possible 4 to 5 years ago. But this deck hits hard, which is another thing I like about it, since it's not common for a white-blue deck to be this aggressive. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Medic Kirby, and happy brewing.